1995 was certainly an interesting time to be a PC gamer interested in racing games. Not because there weren't any, the PC had plenty of serious driving games, but meanwhile, the arcades were showing off things like Daytona USA and Ridge Racer. Colourful, texture-mapped 3D racers running at ridiculous speeds on hardware specifically designed to make your home computer feel, well, very inadequate. Then the PlayStation arrived and suddenly you could have Ridge Racer at home, provided of course that your home contained a PlayStation. If instead it contained an enormous beige PC running MS-DOS, well, things were slightly different. And that is where Screamer comes in. Released in 1995, Screamer was developed by the Italian studio Graffiti, and that company would eventually become Milestone, which I'm sure you know from one of many, many racing games, and of course published by Virgin Interactive. Rather than making another serious PC driving simulation, Graffiti essentially looked at those arcade racers and decided that PC players deserved some of that nonsensical, colourful fun as well. And that is what we're looking at today. Earlier this year, a game by the name of Screamer released from Milestone, which was an attempt to reboot the franchise, and that got me thinking, what were the earlier games actually like? Because I've never played them. So I'm working my way through and we're starting with the original Screamer. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Graffiti were not subtle about the fact that this was taking inspiration from the arcade cabinets of the time. Bright sports cars, high speeds, ridiculous physics, huge power slides, and a constantly shouting announcer. Tracks filled with helicopters and scenery flying past before the computer really has any time to render it. It was basically Ridge Racer if Ridge Racer had been installed from a CD-ROM after spending 20 minutes configuring your Sound Blaster, and somehow it really worked. Screamer became one of the early successes that established Milestone as a racing developer, spawning Screamer 2 in 1996 and Screamer Rally the following year in 97. And in 2026, a reboot. But go back to the original today and there's pretty much nothing connecting it to that modern game. No anime, no combat system or storyline, nobody has 17 paragraphs of emotional trauma explaining why they need to win an illegal street race. Now, I'll be so real, I have mad respect for the 2026 Screamer. I think it's a very cool game, I think it looks cool and plays cool, but I just did not click with it the way I hoped I would. I don't think it's bad at all, it just wasn't a game that really felt like it was for me. I don't know if that's a controversial take or not, but I just didn't click with it. But if you did, hell yeah, it's a cool ass game. Anyway, let's get back to 95 Screamer. So yeah, there's no story or anything in this game, there's just cars, 6 tracks, a championship and a couple of other modes, and an announcer who appears personally offended every single time you dare get close to a barrier. So, 30 years later, is it still worth playing, or was this impressive entirely because everyone's monitor was like 10 inches wide and weighed approximately the same as a washing machine? Let's find out. So before we get into the driving, let's just talk about how aggressively 1995 Screamer is. So let's go over to Live Action Kledge to talk about the presentation. So of course, we have to start off by looking at the menu design, because that's the first impression you typically get from any game. And this is extremely arcadey. Look at the way this text is wobbling around. I mean, it's fantastic. What's not to like? I mean, it's just this very blue theming. It doesn't really scream racing game, but I think it looks pretty cool. And then you've got the name select screen, which is very, very traditional arcadey. I like that a lot. And then beyond that, there's no faff, there's no fluff or anything. You just pick the car and you go. It's very arcadey, and it's exactly what you'd want from a game like this. You can't really complain. Anyway, back to you, VoiceOver Kledge. So, Screamer officially advertises 12 cars, and that is technically true. In the same way that owning 6 pairs of shoes means that I own 12 shoes. There are really 6 different car designs, each available with either an automatic or manual gearbox. The manual versions are treated as separate selections and have slightly better performance. Typically, the official top speed of the manual versions is like 5 to 10 miles per hour higher than the automatic ones. Now, important information for you is that none of the cars are officially licensed. Instead, Screamer employs the classic video game technique of designing something that looks incredibly familiar and then giving it a name that sounds like an energy drink. The Shadow is very obviously inspired by the Lamborghini Diablo, the Tiger resembles an F40, and the Panther is effectively a Porsche 911 of some description. You get the idea, but they all look really good, so don't think I'm slandering them for a second. Each car is rated for top speed, acceleration, and grip, and despite the extremely basic handling model, those differences do actually matter. Effectively, there are two different playstyles that you can approach this game with. You can drift around every corner, or you can slow down, take the right line, and come out the other side without losing any grip or sliding around. That's entirely up to you. Basically, if you want to play it in a more arcadey style and drift around everywhere, well, choose a car with less grip. But if you want to drive like a professional racer, well, choose a car with more grip and pick your lines correctly. I definitely leaned more towards the drifty side because I just thought it was more fun and suited the vibe of the game much better. But whatever the playstyle, it's still fun either way. There is also one secret vehicle, which is the Bullet, which is basically a turbo rocket car once you win all the championships, and oh my god, it's so fast and so grippy, you can beat all the time trials and challenges with this thing with no difficulty whatsoever. It's basically the reward for mastering the game. I don't know why, but it kind of reminds me of that speed rocket car from Simpsons Hit and Run, if that car actually had grip.
Lap down. Look at that time. Watch out for the next bend.
Anyway, let's talk more about the handling, because that's where Screamer's Ridge Racer influence kind of becomes impossible to ignore. It's not really a game that's intended to be about realistic cornering, you don't manage your weight transfer or anything. You just turn, and if you have a low grip car, the back of the car comes out, and suddenly you're travelling around a 90-degree corner at like 140 miles per hour. The power sliding is ridiculous, in fact sometimes the cars do a 360 spin around the corner. That's how over the top this game is. But it's also the entire reason that the game works. The cars have an enormous amount of grip until they suddenly don't, and once the slide begins you can throw them through corners with almost complete disregard for conventional physics. The current official description calls the game deliberately unrealistic, while historical material surrounding the game consistently emphasizes its high-speed power sliding. It certainly takes a little while to get used to and to understand, and I found it to feel very stiff at the beginning, and you'll see through some of my footage that I was really not very good at this game. Once I properly got into it and put over an hour in, I did get a bit better. Either way, I still had a blast, even when I wasn't playing well. A lot of it is really about throttle control, to be honest. You just have to adjust it slightly to make sure you don't overshoot a corner or undershoot a corner. And once you kind of figure that out, it's really not too bad. You do definitely have to make sure that you don't slam on the brakes, because that's speed running into a massive crash where you'll just smash into the barrier. The game kind of encourages you to either not brake or kind of tap the brakes on and off a little bit before you enter a corner, or instead just release the acceleration and let it gradually slow down. Because if you hold the brake in, you are going to crash. It's very hard to control if you do that. The handling is definitely more primitive when compared with Ridge Racer itself. Namco's game feels more polished and more predictable. Screamer sometimes feels as though the car has decided to begin power sliding several milliseconds before you've decided to. Well, I do suppose this is a game called Screamer. Predictability isn't really something I should have expected. However, it is responsive, it's quick, and it's immediately entertaining, and I think that matters much more than any realism, especially in an arcade game. Screamer's goal is to not make me feel like I'm controlling a real Ferrari, especially because legally I'm apparently not even driving one. The goal is to just make you feel fast, and it definitely succeeds at that.
Checkpoint.
Now, there is one thing you do need to avoid in this game, and that is really anything solid, especially other cars. Hitting another car in Screamer can just completely destroy your momentum. In fact, in my opinion, I don't think it's aged too well, and it's not because the vehicle takes damage, because there's like no actual damage system. Instead, contact often produces one of those wonderful 90s racing game collisions where neither object appears to weigh literally anything. A small tap against another car can suddenly launch you sideways.
It's unfuckable!
Touch a barrier and you can go from first place to facing the wrong way before you've even had a chance to process what's going on. And the AI opponents are very happy to participate in this. Opponents crowd together and frequently make contact, which means the opening few corners can become complete chaos. There's very little racing etiquette, nobody's leaving space, and nobody obviously is getting a track limits warning. It's a lot of supercars competing under the sporting regulations of a supermarket car park. However, that said, as much as it did annoy me when I got hit, you can use that to your advantage. If you're side by side with an opponent, and you are about half a car length ahead, if you turn into them, they're gonna crash and you don't get affected. That's how it works. If you're behind an opponent and you hit them, you're gonna bounce off. But if you're ahead, it works in the opposite way, so you really can use that to your advantage, especially when you reach the higher difficulties. Maybe it's not the way that this game was intended to be played, but you can do it, and it doesn't stop you, so I would recommend it. So let's talk about the tracks, because there are 6 main circuits in this game. Palm Town, Lake Valley, Lindbergh, Palm Town Night, Sun Beach Hill, and Sandrock. You don't immediately have access to all of them, progressing through the championship gradually opens the later tracks, while reverse versions provide additional variants. And considering how small the track list actually is, there's a surprising amount of variety here. Palm Town is the easiest, it's the opening circuit, and is basically the introduction to the game, fast and built around huge sweeping corners. Lake Valley moves into alpine scenery and combines faster sections with more technical corners. Lindbergh is the European theme with buildings, hotels, tunnels, helicopters, and tighter 90-degree bends. Then Palm Town Night takes that basic city track at the start and covers it in some absolutely fantastic lighting with working headlights and an amusement park with a Ferris wheel. It looks really cool, it's just got such good vibes. Sun Beach Hill is longer and more technical, while Sandrock is easily the most difficult track with narrow sections, hairpins, and a dramatic bridge running through its desert environment. What makes these tracks particularly impressive is how alive they try to look. Helicopters flying overhead, aircraft passing over, trains, buildings, tunnels, amusement rides, and moving objects around the scenery. Don't get me wrong, none of this sounds particularly extraordinary today, but at the time this was fantastic, and it still holds up. That does come at a cost though. The draw distance is not very big. Objects pop into existence constantly. Entire pieces of scenery appear ahead of the car like the local council has just approved planning permission. But Screamer moves so quickly that this almost becomes part of its visual identity. The world is essentially being assembled like 25 meters in front of you and dismantled immediately afterwards. Just don't look too closely, your computer is trying its best. So let's talk about the game modes this game has to offer. So you've got the Championship mode, it's the main progression system. You begin in the lower league and work through increasingly difficult events. You need to finish in the top 3 to continue, collecting enough points to move into the next championship tier. Progress also unlocks additional tracks for use elsewhere in the game. There are beginner, amateur, and pro levels, and the difficulty curve is significant. Beginner is extremely forgiving, and once you understand the handling, it's entirely possible to disappear and potentially even lap the AI. Amateur begins demanding a little bit more consistency, but still not too much, and Pro finally expects you to understand the tracks rather than simply point the car towards the horizon and hope you go in the right direction. The tracks themselves are short, but crashes are so punishing, one mistake can erase an entire race, which is how the game does become kind of challenging. There are also checkpoints and time limits to deal with like classic arcade races, meaning you can't just recover at your leisure. And the faster championships gradually reduce your margin for error, because those later ones give you less time between checkpoints and opponents are now faster. But once you complete the Pro League, you reach the Bullet League, and this thing is ridiculous. You go against the rocket car, it has a listed top speed of 357 km per hour with maximum acceleration and grip. Now that doesn't sound enormously faster than some of the standard cars until you actually race against it, Trying to beat it becomes the closest Screamer gets to a proper final boss, and this is where I recommend you abuse that collision that I was talking about earlier.
Number one! Just what I want to see! Checkpoint!
Outside of the normal races and championships, Screamer also has a few special modes. Time Attack is exactly what you'd expect, you race against the clock, with the game also providing a ghost of your best performance. Simple, effective, no complaints here. Then there's Cone Carnage, and the objective there is to drive around the circuit, hitting cones with each successful hit, adding time to the clock. Again, quite simple but quite entertaining. And then finally, Slalom places gates around the circuit that you need to pass through to extend your remaining time. They're not enormous additions, but for a game with only 6 primary circuits, they add some useful variety. Cone Carnage in particular is basically an entire mode dedicated to doing the exact opposite of what every driving instructor has ever told you. There is something strangely satisfying about deliberately aiming for every piece of roadside furniture, although the time limits can become surprisingly tight. Miss several cones and suddenly the game treats your inability to destroy traffic equipment as a serious personal failure. The game also offers 3 difficulty levels across its main challenges, giving the relatively small amount of content a bit more longevity. And to be honest, that's probably Screamer's biggest content-related weakness today. There just isn't very much of it. 6 unique tracks, 6 core car designs plus a rocket ship, a relatively straightforward championship, a couple of special modes, but it's not really a game you're going to spend 50 hours completing. It's designed around short bursts. Choose a car, run a few races, try and beat a lap time, and leave. But that's fine, because not every game has to take 50 hours to complete, because that's just torture at times. And honestly, in that respect, I think it's aged quite well, but I think there will be players that go into it expecting a lot more than what it actually is, especially if you go back to it after playing the new Screamer. However, the counter-argument there is, you know it's from 1995, it's like £6 on GOG, it's obviously not going to be filled to the brim with content, and it doesn't need to be. So let's talk about the graphics. Technically, Screamer is probably more interesting now than it is visually attractive, because obviously, it does look 30 years old. The cars are low poly, textures wobble and distort, and the horizon appears to always be about 15 meters away. Trackside objects regularly arrive without any warning, and occasionally the geometry does something that strongly suggests everyone involved would prefer you not to examine it frame by frame. But this was a fully texture-mapped 3D racing game designed to operate on very unpowerful hardware, and that real-time texture mapping was one of its major selling points. Cars have reflective-looking windscreens, there's animated textures and proper 3D scenery, different viewpoints, and the whole thing moves quickly enough to create a genuinely convincing sense of speed. So for the time and hardware, that's insanely impressive. You know, sure, everything is a bit chunky, everything's a bit blurry, and you could say the pixels are large enough to be part of your furniture, but it moves, and it looks good whilst doing it. I'm a huge fan of the visuals in this game. It's just like being in a theme park. It's so bright and colourful and fun, and I just love it so much.
Pole position.
And then we've got the sound design. Screamer features a soundtrack that leans heavily into aggressive rock and metal style music to support the arcade style atmosphere. The engine noises are functional, the collision sounds are suitably violent, and the environmental audio is a nice touch, but none of that really matters because Screamer has an announcer, and this man is furious. Constantly. He shouts at the start, he comments on your performance, he mocks you when things go wrong, but he also congratulates you when things go well. And he does all this with the energy of somebody who has bet their entire pension on your finishing position.
Lap down. Look at that time. Whoa! Right to the snake. Powers fly.
It should become annoying. Well, actually it probably does become annoying after a long time, but it's also a huge part of the game's personality. Screamer doesn't have drivers or a story, so this anonymous man screaming directly into my ear ends up becoming the closest thing the game has to a character. Make a mistake and he's disappointed, crash and he's furious, and win and he suddenly sounds like your dad has finally admitted your YouTube channel might constitute employment. Yeah, that one hit a bit too close to home. Anyway, it's pretty wonderful. So how did it hold up critically? Well, according to Moby Games, the game aggregation site, it has 25 critic ratings, giving it an average of 82%, which is pretty damn good. More importantly, it succeeded well enough to establish a full series. Screamer 2 arrived 1 year later in '96, and Screamer Rally followed the following year in '97. Milestone now describes the Screamer series as instrumental in establishing the company, which means this slightly ridiculous DOS game eventually sits at the beginning of a lineage that leads to things like MotoGP, Ride, and Hot Wheels Unleashed. That's quite a career trajectory. Sadly, the Screamer name gradually disappeared after the 90s, with later games changing direction substantially, and by the time that PC hardware became capable of effortlessly reproducing arcade-style 3D racers, the market had kinda just moved on. Need for Speed exploded in popularity, Ridge Racer had already been established, and Codemasters had its own increasingly sophisticated racers. The novelty of simply seeing fast texture-mapped 3D graphics on a home computer disappear. That left Screamer in an awkward position. Its greatest achievement was also temporary. But somehow, it's still fantastic. So is it actually good today? Yes. With some fairly enormous qualifications. There isn't much content, 6 circuits obviously isn't enough for the long haul, and the cars are basically 6 vehicles duplicated across 2 transmissions. But the actual racing remains fun. The handling is immediate, the power slides are ridiculous, the circuits, while not many, are varied, and the championship gets genuinely challenging. So yeah, if you were wanting to look into the older Screamer games, go and pick them up. They're on GOG, they're all like £6 each, and Screamer Original is just so much fun. You will have a blast with it, even if you don't actually play it for too long. It's definitely worth the entry price. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of Screamer? Do you think it's a good game? Have you played it before? Or are you going to go and play it now you've seen this video? Share all your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.